What is going on, guys? This is not a podcast. I'm your host, Reed, brought to you with my other co-host, Tim.
What's up, guys? I'm Tim.
So we're back again with This Week, and as you guys saw from the teaser on TikTok and our other social media adverts, we're basically going to be talking about a group that has more power and more structure than the mafia, with the government ties and expansive capabilities that you see in the Mexican cartels. And that is the South African taxi mafias. So Tim, just to get it right off the bat, and for this week, guys, FYI, I'm just going to be explaining it a little bit more to Tim. He got a little busy on the schedule, and so it seems like it's just easier for me to just kind of go run through everything, and then we'll kind of go into discussion more deep about it. But Tim, the best way that I could just start this off is a quote that was from an opposition taxi driver, like one of the taxi drivers involved in the mafia. An op, yeah.
Yeah.
But he said, the best way to compete for passengers is to hire a hitman to shoot a rival's taxi. So essentially,
Crazy.
What you see in these communities and what's been happening mainly in South Africa is that these taxi mobs have formed over the past few decades, and they've genuinely created structures that's gone from the top down. So you have kind of a boss, and the boss owns the taxi company. And the taxi company could be named, South African Taxi Group or something like that. And the head of that guy is similar to what you would think of as like El Chapo or Al Capone, the lead guy. And then you have owners, and the owners are guys, they own the routes and they own the local taxis in that area. So that would be like if you're looking at New York, an owner of the Manhattan route, the owner of the Brooklyn route, the owner of, maybe you go over to New Jersey, like those routes, and, where those taxis are held. And so they own the medallions, and they technically own the cars. And then you have the lower guys, which are the drivers. And those are similar to like what you think of like sicarios or like street level criminals that kind of have to do the dirty work. And they're the ones driving around people. And oftentimes those are the guys that get caught in all the crossfire and all the beef. So some numbers for you just to kind of really get a perspective of how big this is. So there's 200,000 total taxis in South Africa that are operating under these different mafia cliques and different groups, but they only get a number of specific routes, and there's only a number of routes that are actually profitable. And the best way to compare this, and I've told you about how interested I am in like the cartels. It's really, and I'm sure you've heard this before, but the most profit-driven areas for the Mexican cartels are border cities. So like Tijuana, Juarez. And this is where, all that constant fighting is happening because that's where all the money is. You can quickly cross the border with supplies and get into the U.S. where there's so much opportunity to be able to sell your drugs. And so that's why all the cartels really want that. Very similar in South Africa is that all these mafias want these routes. And so they essentially fight over these routes, and that's led to hundreds and hundreds of deaths and arson and everything that you could really think of. And I'm going to run through the history really quick so we can, kind of get an understanding of how we got to where we are. But I don't know, I just want to hear some initial reactions, like just hearing about all that.
When you told me about the topic a couple weeks ago, I was like, how the hell is a South African taxi subject going to be interesting? Because in the U.S., taxis are just taxis, it seems. It seems like kind of a regulated business. There's no shootings between taxi drivers. It just doesn't, it doesn't seem like an exciting thing. It's like, it's a taxi business. They're just taxis driving people around. But, and I don't know, hearing about this, it still doesn't totally make sense. You know what I mean? It just seems so out of this world that taxis would be run by the mobs and taxi drivers would have beef with other taxi drivers and another taxi gang. I don't know. I'm interested to kind of learn more about this.
Yeah, I actually couldn't agree more. When I first heard about this topic, I kind of had the same reaction. I was like, how in the actual fuck is this even happening at some place in the world? And what's even crazy is I've never heard about it up until this point. And I feel like I haven't heard anybody that's ever heard of this or really, had it really affect their life or any way, or just like thought of it as like a topic. Like I feel like it doesn't get talked about enough how pretty wild it is. And to kind of throw some further numbers at you too, just for people that are curious, the amount of passengers that are carried daily by these taxi cars is 15 million. and then they're worth about
in
1.2
South
billion
Africa.
dollars. Yeah, 15 million.
Wow.
And it's only in a few
Wow.
key cities too. It's not, that's what's kind of crazy is like, imagine it's the US where this is happening, but the only cities that are getting people are Dallas, LA, and New York City.
Yeah.
So that's
So,
the only
like,
places they're
it'd be
actually
like-
operating.
Let's say in Virginia, you're taking a taxi. There's no gangs or anything, but you go to New York City, you got to be wary.
Well, there's not even taxis in those areas.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's essentially these
Yeah.
taxis only operate in these areas because, you know, I mean, South Africa is very, I guess, structured in a weird way where there's a huge level of poverty and I guess wealth inequality. So these cities are the places where there's actual, you know, I guess stuff going on where taxis are kind of necessary, but there's only so many cities within the country that it's pretty relevant for that. But so 15 million, and then they're worth 1.2 billion dollars as a total industry.
Wow.
And that's only
Yeah.
split between a number of different taxi groups. So it's extremely lucrative. But like I said, you know, that's why it's kind of created so much chaos. But it's all right. To get a little bit of history, South Africa was just obviously extremely notorious for this. I feel like everyone is familiar with it, but it was an apartheid government from the late 1940s, so post World War II, all the way until 1994. And, you know, this is where you get some prominent figures like Nelson Mandela that came out of that movement. And it's still extremely relevant in culture today. You know, South Africa right now is actually seeing a lot of chaos, and I'm sure you've heard about that a little bit on the news. It's just kind of,
Yeah.
you know, because it's only been close to 3 decades since, you know, apartheid actually ended, which is insane to think about. But just like anything, or, you know, any structure that changes in the government, it's not like it happens overnight. It's, you know, there's usually decades of kind of pent up frustration and anger that really pushes, you know, the people and the government to the limit to actually consider making some changes. However, if you're an apartheid government, if you're a government that kind of is structured on hate, you look for ways to kind of segment groups that are going against you. And so the best way that they really could think about doing this is changing how they structured taxis, which I know sounds crazy, but so in pre-1977, the taxi was a state-owned monopoly enterprise. It was run through the state. You could basically apply to get a license, and you're able to drive. And then that actually switched over in 1977 towards more of a deregulated atmosphere.
Yeah.
And they actually allowed African American drivers, or what I can't believe, just black drivers
Yes.
to actually take part.
African-American,
I don't know why that popped in, but
No,
black drivers to actually drive taxis.
Which was probably a big deal in post-apartheid.
It was a big. Well, it wasn't
South
post
Africa,
apartheid yet. They didn't-
really? Okay.
Yeah, they wouldn't become post apartheid for another decade. But the reason that the government decided to do this, and it wasn't just out of the kindness of their heart. See, what happened is the groups that were going. Imagine that they were all working together and rioting, like trying to make change. They were all coming together under like one united banner. So, if you want to make like a comparison in the U.S., like Black Lives Matter, like working under that one banner. And there was smaller groups and smaller tribes and people who didn't necessarily get along, but they were coming together for this one common cause. But what the government recognized is that if they could create cracks in that foundation, then they could possibly break it apart or at least hold on for longer and figure out what to do next. And weirdly enough, the taxi deregulation of that market was the best way that they figured to do this. Because what happened is a lot of these communities from outside the, you know, more wealthier cities started coming in to get licenses to be able to drive these taxis. So once this run on the regulation centers really had the opportunity to kind of, I guess, take hold, what people recognized, and this led to monopolization of these taxi licenses, is they were bought up by different groups. So there was people that were white that were buying up a ton of them. There were people that were black that were buying up a ton of them. And then what they would do is they would let people skip the years-long waiting list that developed.
To get like the medallion.
To get the medallion, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Because so many people wanted to be able to get in on this business because, it's a great opportunity to be taxi. It's no longer state-owned, especially if, you are very poor in this country. It's a great opportunity. So essentially they created unions that you would be able to purchase your opportunity for a license for, and you didn't have to wait years to do it. You could just quickly get one. But then that kind of transpired in that you were committed to that union. Mm-hmm. And that union, what happened is a lot of people that were underneath the banner for freedom and apartheid, they started forming the unions within that. And so you might have all been under the apartheid banner, but you had the South African Taxi Corporation over here. You had South African driver community over here. A number of other different taxi unions that formed, and that started infighting within that apartheid kind of protest structure group.
Yep.
And then quickly what happened is the government would give certain routes to certain unions. And these routes would be the most lucrative ones available. And then quickly what happened from there is that instead of just, taking that and not being able to have a profitable company, whatever it might be, that's when the fighting started. And they started fighting over these different routes. And I'm blanking on his name right now, but there was a very prominent, let me see, I'm trying to read through my notes really quick. There's a very prominent apartheid figure that was actually murdered due to this violence in this routes. And once that happened,
really?
Yeah, almost the whole movement almost fell through.
Wow.
It was pretty crazy.
Yeah.
But, so essentially the government let these unions just do these things because they figured that it would be the best way to kind of really hurt the revolutionary group that had been forming. Yeah. And it really did do a good job. But you started seeing this kind of take a new level of kind of structure and hold in different cities. So one city, Cape Peninsula, between 1990 and 1992, there were two rivals. It was called the Laguna Taxi Group and the Western Cape Black Taxi Group.
Okay.
And they just started fighting over the different routes that were permitted in that city because the Laguna Taxi Group was the one that was permitted by the government to get it. Mm-hmm. And the Western Cape Blacks decided to just fully attack and try to take over those routes by violence. And like I said, the government saw this as a great opportunity and just basically let it happen. Instead of enforcing the routes that they had permitted, they just simply let them fight it out because they knew that that would create infighting in those communities. And then within 2 years...
Why do they want the infighting? The government?
Because, so, like I said, a lot of these taxi unions became owned by blacks that had been kind of under the regime's boot. And originally they were part of this apartheid movement, but they recognized that if they let the unions form themselves, that sadly human greed would take over, and this would lead to infighting within the group. And like I said, once you put fragments in the structure, the whole thing breaks apart.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
But so in Cape Peninsula, within 2 years, there was nearly 1,000 deaths between the two groups infighting. And the thing that's interesting about this is that with the way South Africa is, and like I've said, it's, high levels of wealth inequality, and this is something that you see similar in the cartel violence in Mexico, which is a very similar, state structure, is that the 1,000 death estimate for just these 2 years is likely extremely low because the number of deaths either don't go solved or are missing persons reported. So there's likely estimated that it's, a number of thousands of deaths. And that's only within 2 years. But in 1994, when the new apartheid government ended and the new regime took over that, was obviously promising change and looking to no longer have the struggles that the country had had for decades before, they tried to re-regulate the taxi business. But the thing is, the damage that the apartheid government had done was already done. The cat was let out of the bag. So much money was flowing from these routes, and the violence was taking over. And a lot of these unions put police on their payroll within those communities and essentially had taken over those communities. And like I said, it's very similar to what you see in the Mexican cartel violence, where if the state wants to knock them out, the state can knock them out. But if you go to the and by the state I mean Mexico. But
Yeah.
if you were to go to specific cities, all those police officers, or a good majority of them, are bought and owned by whatever cartel owns that community. It's a very similar structure with these taxi drivers.
Yeah. Yeah.
So basically, the country realized that if they tried to re-regulate and there was like massive protests and massive violence done by these taxi groups, essentially terrorist acts, they realized that, you know, what they're doing right now was not sensible. Like they wanted to redesign this country and bring it out from, you know, the decades of violence and terrible things that has been happening. They realized that if we just leave the taxi drivers alone, because we don't need that violence right now, we'll come back to them.
Yeah.
But the thing is that leaving them alone, they never could come back and stop them because they just got too much power, and they were just too well structured, and there was just too much money involved. And pretty much from there on, we've had thousands and thousands of deaths from 1994 up until today. And basically these taxis just go into war over these communities.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy. The question I have is, I mean, this is maybe easier said than done. You know, people need to go to work, and maybe the civilian, you know, just as a civilian, I feel like I'd not want to take a taxi. I mean, if there's like a chance that, you know, the car could get shot up, unless like you think that maybe civilians, they kind of try to keep them safe, because I feel like for both sides, they'd be like, let's not shoot the civilians in the car, because that would just bring down business for the both of us. You know what I mean?
Well, so it is interesting, but the civilians themselves almost become affiliated to one of the unions as well. Like they become, it's like if you're buying drugs, you have your drug dealer. And sometimes it's by choice. It's just like you were in the area and this has just become, sometimes taxi drivers will come to your house or come to where you're standing and threaten you and say, if you don't get in the car and become, you know, paying customer of me, we'll kill you. And we'll kill your families and friends and stuff like that. And so that's how these people end up committing to these different taxis. But they often are caught in the crossfire, and that's one of the saddest parts about it is because the main targets of these taxi mafias are the drivers. And because that's usually the easiest target for the hitman that they hire. But these taxis can only fit 8 people, 8 to 16, depending on the type of car. But they'll often drive 30 to 40 people in these cars. They'll just stuff them in.
Oh my God.
When these shootings happen, you know, car stuff like that, someone's bound to get hit. So crossfire happens all the time. And like I said, they will come and threaten people that are notorious for driving with this one union gang or this one union gang, and basically make you have to be a part of their group. And the thing is,
Yeah.
the reason there's so much money is that there's no other option for these people, you know,
Yeah.
because they need to be able to go work in these towns, and they live in communities that are outside of these towns that need a car, but are often too poor to be able to afford a car. And this is the public transport.
So I guess you could kind of equate that to, well, it's not the same like a drug dealer getting you addicted. Like, you know that it's dangerous, you know what I mean? But not that they're addicted to going in taxis, but it's kind of like at a certain point, it's like you need the taxis, and you know that this threat is there.
I believe Tim just froze.
Did I freeze?
You're back. Yeah, you're back. It's all good.
Okay, all right. I don't know where I was left off, but
You were
saying
saying-
similar to drug dealers, you know, you get hooked on a drug, not that they're addicted to, you know, going in taxis. That'd be kind of ridiculous. But I mean, if you need to go to work, you need to go to work. I mean, it's either that or, you know, you don't have any money, and maybe you just kind of take a chance.
No, yeah, I agree. I honestly think that's a great comparison because if you're addicted to fentanyl, which is a great example and something that we're seeing in communities all over the U.S., you don't really have a choice but to not go get your fix. You know, like you have to go get your fix. And so you might have to go to this guy, which, you know, is sketchy or not good, or who even knows, or go to a community where it's very unsafe and put yourself in really bad positions. Obviously, I think there's a little bit more direct violence in these taxis, which is really strange because you would think that drugs would be the way more dangerous. But, you know, But innocent people get caught in the crossfires all the time, like gangs in Chicago or Baltimore, where those two groups are fighting over drug areas. So it's a very similar sense. I think you're definitely on point with that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess anything can really become something that is fought over. When like prohibition happened, alcohol. I mean, that's kind of even like unfathomable to think about now, like alcohol distributors getting into like gunfights and stuff like that.
Yeah,
where it's like where it wants like it kind of just like any type of product can I guess become a thing that is fought for because of customers and stuff like that. And makes sense.
I mean, if there's a ton of money involved in it and there's not enough regulation, or you just have too much power, that's when the violence starts. One of the things that's really interesting in the past decade, there's been a number of examples where the government's tried to stop it. They tried creating long distance bus routes, and the buses were often intercepted. People were either shot on it, they would burn them. Not the people, but the buses. They'd make people get off, they'd burn the buses, they'd block routes, do different stuff like that. That when they created passenger trains, the taxi drivers would do a similar thing where they would just go and burn all the trains and everything.
Oh, wow.
They would just do crazy things like that. Tons of people would die. It'd just be like a massacre. They'd stop trains, kill people, whatever it might be. And it's outrageous, but it's like, no matter what the state does, these taxis just decide to, like I said, they're burning any option they have, destroying it, killing people, whatever it might be. And there's just nothing the government can really do to stop them because they have billions of dollars under their assets. They basically own the local police. And in a lot of ways, they're considered the local police by locals. Like, I forget, during those mass riots that were happening, I don't know if you saw that. It was like the end of 2020 or 2021.
I kind of do remember seeing something. It was kind of like not reminiscent of what was happening, but it like I remember seeing that on Twitter, and it seems like the mainstream media wasn't talking about it. And I was like seeing videos of like destroyed South African villages and stuff. I have no clue what was going on there.
So it just had to do with, like I said, the country's just had such a difficult level of, I guess, like coming from such a strict structure of an apartheid, and still the massive wealth inequality that's seen there is that it's just created this kind of boiling effect where you've seen a lot of people from those outskirts and very poor regions have basically started attacking these cities and rioting, and it's led to outrageous levels of, I guess, property damage and killings, and it's been very dangerous. But what happened is the taxi drivers, because they were losing money on it, they got called on by their bosses, and they went to these riots, and they would set up blockades with their taxis and like have guns and everything, and essentially like shut these things down. And the police were too scared to go into these communities to do it. And the taxi drivers would go in and do it and shut it down and stop local stores from getting looted and destroyed because that was their business.
So they were kind of acting like the police in this scenario.
They were the police in this scenario.
That's crazy.
And there was another example where there was a great natural disaster. It's like some type of huge flood, I think in Cape Town or something similar, maybe a hurricane. And the taxi drivers were the one handing out relief and like driving around. Yeah. Because it's almost like the Hearts and Mind campaign that you see in Iraq. And in fact, it happens in Mexico with the cartels a lot. Well, they'll go into these communities and they'll pay, they'll bring out $30,000 and give away a few trucks, and they give away food and this and that because they want the community to love them. It's a very similar tactic.
I mean, that makes the question I had earlier a lot more clear of why people would go in these taxis. I mean, if it's like they're providing a service, they're helping quell rebellion, which is crazy, and like helping out the community when in need, I'd be like, fuck it, I'm going with. Like, I like that taxi company. They gave me food when my house was destroyed, or they helped me rebuild.
Yeah, that's it. Well, that's the crazy thing is because you have. This is why I said in our teaser that they basically have the government connection or like the power of the cartels is because the people in that community don't have anyone else that's really kind of looking out for them. even though these people are creating an outrageously dangerous environment for them, there's no police that care. And the state's doing what it can, I guess, in terms of like trying to find out other options. But, you know, if I imagine any state actor can shut down something like this if they really truly wanted to, but at the
they don't
same
really
time,
want to.
it's not even that. It's just like how much time and effort would actually have to go into it. How much money, how many soldiers, whatever it might be, have to be committed to this, and no one's doing it. So if you're, which a vast amount of the country and people working in these communities are, you know, on the lower economic scale, you know, like what you're saying is these are the people that are like looking out for you, that are allowing you to achieve your livelihood, to feed your kids, to be able to, you know, go to work every day and actually live somewhat of a, you know, successful life. You know, you're gonna kind of be committed to one group, one taxi. I mean, I think that's kind of the outrageous part about it, is like they create these communities, and when there's no one else fulfilling it, it's like that's where these dangerous, you know, violent groups kind of can put their foothold in and kind of take over.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy. I don't know. Now, I mean, now it kind of it makes sense now, but I mean, initially upon hearing about the taxi wars, I don't know, I was like, the hell are you talking about, the taxi wars? Is there no Uber in this area?
Well, there is, but like most of the people, if you're like a, you know, wealthy citizen, you're driving your own car, I mean, you could Uber. I'm sure there's Uber, but yeah, I mean, these people have, you know, pennies on pennies.
But these people might not even have phones, the ones who are actually taking these taxis.
Yeah, not even have phones. Like they barely can afford. They pay very little. I mean, the actual taxi drivers too. I have a rundown of like I said at the beginning, they say the easiest way to get new passengers is to hire a hitman to kill your competitors.
Interesting, yeah.
And I have some numbers in terms of like how much it actually costs to kill somebody. So for if you want to kill a passenger, it's $100. If you want to kill a driver, $200. To kill a boss, so like one of the head guys in one of these unions, is about $20,000. I think one of the low-level manager people, like the heads of like one of the local unions, is about $1,500.
That's not much.
I think that's kind of the most surprising part. Is like $200 to kill one of the drivers, and then $100 to kill a passenger, but $200 to kill one of the drivers is like, that's just such a minimal amount, especially for an industry bringing in over $1 billion.
So that kind of shows that the drivers, they might not even be like these, like, not drug lords, like taxi lords. They're probably just also trying to, if they're valued that low, it's probably just regular people just trying to make some money.
Yeah, so the taxi drivers actually get paid very, very little. Like they have to pay a majority of what they get to the mid-level boss. Okay. And so the taxi drivers see very, very little bit amount of money. And and that's why it gets so violent, because they need to have a certain amount of passengers to be able to pay their boss. It's similar to how New York works with the taxis, where it's like you have to pay off a medallion. Yeah. And it's however much you're committed to it. It's like you have a certain due that you have to pay every day to your union boss. And if you can't meet that, you know, they'll probably kill you. They'll do something similar to that. Or you just lose your job. I mean, for them, that's like, you know, a really bad situation, because then you totally have the job. But so they make virtually no money. And so if you lose one passenger, that can be the difference between making not much money and making no money at all, or even getting, you know, killed by your boss or thrown to the curb. And so that's why they get so aggressive with making sure that the passengers are their passengers, and that if you're trying to take their passengers, you know, they're going to do something about you. But also they'll try to kill you so they can take your passengers, and then they just add more to their little community.
That's kind of crazy.
No, and I think it kind of almost speaks to, and I'm sure we'll do another episode that talks about going deeper dive into the cartel and even the mafia, but it does speak to that the people that are often the ones that kind of are hurt the most by these, violent criminal organizations are not, the people that are high up that are extremely wealthy, the El Chapos, the Al Capones, whatever. But it's literally just like the lowest income group, lowest economically sitting group that are kind of hurt the most. And that's everywhere.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm looking. Okay, so this has just been going on for a while. I'm looking at an article from New York Times. For some reason, I thought it was maybe like 2020. No, it's 2006.
For the taxi wars?
Taxi wars, yeah.
It's been happening since 1977 when they started deregulating.
Yeah.
And it's just carried on from there. And it's weird because it's like that. It's almost weird how in line it is with the cartels in Mexico, because they started in a similar time where they really started to organize and become groups. But it's just like, it's one of those snowball effects thing where by the time the government, the right government came in that wasn't looking to create chaos, but actually wanted to have a structured and, safe nation, there was just nothing they could do because they had grown too powerful. They had gained too many assets. They had making too much money. The communities looked at them as the police force, the people that actually were there for the community. It just spiraled out of control. It's like, what do you do at that point,
Yeah. Damn. So this shit, you see any way this is going to end? Any end in sight?
I mean, and that's what I think I was kind of getting at too, is like, it's almost like with these type of things, it's like, it's a really hard thing to kind of squash, because you almost need to be authoritarian in mind to really, and it's like, in a country, I don't see this ending in South Africa, especially with the way that they're going currently, because there's so much chaos in the nation, and the nation's barely holding itself still as it is. But I think it's like, you see this all around the world, and I think like comparing this to Mexico is just, it's really interesting because obviously they're just so different. I mean, taxis and drugs, like you would never think those two could create similar levels of chaos. Yeah, but they do. They are. And I think both nations are a really good example where it's like, what do you do at this point? It's like when the cat's out of the bag and when the snowballs roll down the hill, and it's so big, it's so vast, and so many people are part of it. I mean, 200,000 taxis, that means there's 200,000 people that are affiliated with these taxi mafias,
Yeah.
And in Mexico, I'm sure there has to be, I'd imagine, similar numbers of people that are affiliated with cartels. It's like, when these groups get so big, really the only way that you can handle it is becoming like extremely authoritarian about it. It's like,
or I could see another, and the government might not want to do this just because it's like costly. I mean, if they provided a means of public transportation,
well, that's
like
what
a bus or like a light rail or something like that.
That's what I was saying earlier. Is they tried to in 2000.
Oh yeah, you did. Yeah, and then they started burning down. Yeah.
2018, and actually, legitimately, when they added long distance bus routes, they added it last year. Last year, it started 2021 between 2022. And within that time, there's over 150 incidents of shootings, stonings, and other acts of violence directed at drivers and passengers that were trying to utilize the bus routes.
Damn.
So, I mean, that's almost, in a year's time, almost half the year, something was happening. So it's like, that's what, and that's the right way to do it, ideally. If you're a normal citizen, you would prefer the government just looks into ways how they could do it without violence, but it's almost like you can't really do it without violence. Yeah,
because if they just burn down any progress you're making, I mean, the government's probably like, fuck this. And especially if the cops are on the payroll, Like I was about to say, maybe, the cops could start pulling over some of these buses with all these people in it. But first off, that would probably fuck up the economy because you'd be fucking up the flow of work, like all these workers, and
100%.
second off, seems like the cops are paid off. So,
And if you gotta change that whole industry, that's $1 billion industry. And
yeah,
I mean, that's a huge dent in South Africa's economy if they just decide to. Even Mexico is a great example of that too. If you take away all the money that's brought in from cartels, it's going to be a huge dent in their GDP.
yeah, that's kind of crazy.
It's like it's one of those things where it's like once it just got so out of hand, there's really nothing to do unless it's. And it's also, we've talked about this before. It's like if you're a normal citizen, do you want them to solve the problem in an authoritarian means?
No, I mean, because if you're normal, honestly, it's probably one of those things where you're a normal citizen, and it's just like an everyday way of life where it's just like, no, maybe these taxis, they're cheap, or I don't know how cheap they are. Like it's how I get to my job, and then if the government starts fucking that up, you're going to feel a very immediate impact to that, So I'm sure the citizens, even though it might be for their own good in the long run, they're thinking short term. They're thinking, I need to get to work.
Well, not even that, too. It's like, and I agree with that fully. A lot of these communities just prefer honestly, if you go to some of these poor communities in both South Africa and Mexico, like we were saying, they're just so at home with these cartel and these mafia groups that they almost prefer them over the government, because that's like, the people that they feel like actually care about them, or at least trying to take care of their communities when the government totally neglects them. But not only that, I think of it, you can make an interesting comparison. It's like after 9/11, we had the Patriot Act come out, which gave the government all sorts of powers to, quote unquote, handle terrorism in means that they saw fit. And a lot of people are recognizing how open-ended that became and how easily they were able to kind of stretch their arms and put their hands in some weird places.
Yeah.
And now imagine if, to quell the gang violence we have in the U.S., they say that we're going to deploy U.S. troops on every street. And you have to check in with them, and you have to do stuff like that. Because that's the only realistic way that, let's say, somewhere like South Africa or Mexico does that. And then if you're one of those citizens that, this might have an effect on your life. There might be, tons of violence. You might hate it. But it's like, how much do you let the government, get their hands involved and get as authoritarian as they can? Because what happens next? Is it worse than what you have right now?
Yeah, and there's never been a time where the government, because of like a critical situation where to quell a critical situation where they've gained control, gained some sort of control to quell it. There's never been a time where they've gained that control to quell it. And then a year or two later, when it's like done, them being like, okay, now we're going to like write it so we can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
I don't think there's ever been a situation, because they're like, oh, why the hell would we give up this newfound power we have? What the Patriot Act was just like, I knew that was about 9/11. What exactly, like, was that again?
I can read through it really quick, but essentially it just gave the government a number of powers that were just like, let's see. So, I mean, under the Patriot Act, the FBI can secretly conduct a physical search or wiretap on American citizens to obtain evidence of a crime without proving probable cause. And that's exactly what the Fourth Amendment explicitly
goes against.
Requires. Yeah. Which basically it was a loophole for them to say, hey, look, we're going to make sure that no terrorists attack us again. But we can, and that's how the NSA was able to legally do what they did, where they just checked in on everybody. And I'm sure they're still doing it for sure. But basically it said, we can, and the thing is they went really free range with this. I mean, what's to say when they can decide what a crime is, what's to say that they don't just decide somebody that's, a nuisance, it's a crime. And they're wiretapping, they're finding out there's no probable cause for them to really check in on you other than they just want to.
And I feel like, obviously we were babies when 9/11 happened, but 9/11 happened, I feel like I'd be like, yes, sign the Patriot Act. You know what I mean?
That's exactly, without a
yeah.
question. Nobody, it really didn't even get talked about until, when did Snowden release what the NSA was doing? Like 2000?
Maybe 13, maybe?
Yeah.
2012. Yeah, and then I don't even know if that was in the national consciousness before that, like, because like now it's like, it's kind of a known thing where like everyone kind of jokes around about it. They're like, oh, the memes about, oh, my FBI agent, I'm talking about, like looking through my phone, helping me out.
Yeah.
Everyone kind of jokes about it. It's like, oh, like everyone kind of has this underlying thing where it's like, I know the government's kind of looking at, like, it's like, I know maybe not spying directly just on me, but I know that they can. And it's kind of scary that that's just become like, oh, well, what are you going to do?
It's insane too, because it's like, and the thing is the legality loopholes that they create with acts like these, like they know what they're doing. They're not going to create something that restricts their power. They're going to create something that's as loose as possible, that they can kind of bend the lines as much as they need to. You know what I mean? So it's like, what I was saying is probable cause. I mean, that's like, that was already, you could be loosey-goosey with that, but if you no longer need that, you can investigate anybody and charge them with any crime you want, because it's pretty easy for pretty much any human being to just find something that you can be like, I can charge them for that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, even if it's a joke, whatever it could be, like you could find a joke about someone saying they're going to kill the president. Like, not the greatest joke ever, but you could say, well, that's a idea of planning terrorism right there.
Also, if you kind of go into something with like bad faith, which kind of, I guess, means that you go into it with the intention of like being like, I don't like, either I want to prove this person wrong, or like I don't trust this person. Like if I started studying your life, recording everything you're doing with already the thought in my head, oh, he's a terrorist, he's planning something, I'm sure I could find something that you're doing that I could be like, oh, that's it. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
not you in particular. But anyone, like, like I'm sure the government does that, like where they.
Well, there was a case in Michigan where I believe it was the guy that tried like robbing the mayor, or not robbing the mayor, like he was gonna like abduct the mayor, or he was gonna plant a bomb, something crazy.
Wait, was that where like the 3 guys tried kidnapping like the Michigan?
That was another instance of this.
Okay, yeah.
You know what? I'm thinking of a different case. Maybe it was in LA. I forget which area it was, but essentially they had an FBI agent like work on this guy daily, and basically convince him to like want to commit jihad. He was like, and they.
Oh wait, was this where he acted like he was a girl?
Maybe, yeah. All I know is they essentially, what's the word? Extremize this person. That's not it, but like make the person an extremist. Like, you know what I'm saying?
I know what you're talking about. It's something extreme.
Radicalize,
yes. Okay, I think we're talking about the same thing. I was just about to bring that up.
Well, they radicalized this guy through Facebook, and then the FBI agent handed him the button to blow up blow up the bomb, and he hit the button, and then they arrested him.
I mean, it's ridiculous.
That's outrageous.
So there was a story, and the thing is, what's a little scary is that we might be talking about 2 different stories, which means that this, I think, happens a lot. I think there was this pretty depressed guy on the internet. I don't know how the FBI finds him. They probably find loners.
They probably target people like that.
Where they think they might have an inkling of, oh, this person could do something. And so this person was, the FBI agent was kind of doing a Chris Hansen, where he was like posing as this, I think like, this Muslim girl, which is kind of like
weird,
fucked up in and of itself, just because it's like, oh, like, of course this has to be the Muslims. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, like that's what the FBI agent's trying to say.
Let's target a little bit more. Yeah.
Let's put it in that direction where it's like not a white terrorist or anything. Like it has to be a Muslim terrorist, because that probably fits the whole agenda for them.
The narrative.
Yeah, so he was like posing as this like cute Muslim girl, like, and it was probably one of the first girls this guy's talked to in his life, and like they had this like ongoing relationship, all just an FBI agent chatting him, and then so slowly this relationship blossoms, and then she like convinces him, hey, you need to do like this is all online, you need to do like a terrorist act, so you can go to paradise with me afterwards or something, so you would be awarded like 72 virgins. I don't know. And then he kept saying no. He's like, I don't want to do it. But she kept being like, your life means nothing. Like, commit a terrorist act here or do this specific thing so you can go to. And then, so like they keep pushing him towards the edge. And eventually he just says, oh, I think I'm just going to like hang myself. He texts her. He's like, I'm just going to hang myself right now. And I think she texts him. She's like, no, don't hang yourself. You'll go to hell. You have to blow up all these people before you do it. So you can go to like paradise. And then I think, so then he's like, okay. And then he's like, okay, I won't kill myself. I'll do it. And then the FBI arrests him. It's like, dude.
Yeah, you
like
what?
Yeah, it's like, well, what are you protecting us from? You made this guy, like, you made this depressed, lonely guy into a radical. And I feel like you could really target anyone and really can manipulate them to like.
Well, the thing is, too, is like how many times have they fucked up, too? Because they're not going to tell us, but like.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate to compare it to shootings that have happened recently, but it's like.
You're right. I mean, how many times they fucked up and it actually, the guy actually did something. And of course they would be like, and I'd have to do research into that before I even start making accusations.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, because that's like something I've only thought about. But like think about it. If they're doing this all the time, there's got to be times that they fucked up and like, oh shit. He actually did it. It's like, let's.
I mean, it's known that through MK Ultra. Through MK Ultra, they gave Charlie Manson LSD and helped him learn how to generate a cult. Like that's like a known thing. The government did that. The FBI or CIA, I guess, at that point. But regardless, though, it's like, and I'm sure it's probably happened way more times and way more dramatic than that. It's like, how many guys were they fucking around with that? And, people always say that, where they're like, this guy put out so many clear, dry cut signals that he was going to do something. And they're like, how did the government not know that? It's like, well, they might have. You know what I mean? I know there's rumors that, like, 9/11
Sorry, you cut out for a bit, Connor. Okay, now you're good.
All right, I'll have to edit this in post. Okay.
All right.
Just clean it up a little bit. Oh, no, what I was saying is the government, there were threats that, or there was rumors that, and I'm pretty sure this is confirmed, that the government like had some inkling that 9/11 might be happening. That, you know what I mean? Like I've heard that before. It's like it's led up to, and the claim is like, how hey, there's so many terrorist threats. Like how do they know? I'm not saying they let it happen, but it's just like stuff like that where it's like, how much of the stuff do they actually know about, and they're either too late to react to, or they create it and they might just let happen because it does some benefit here or there. I think, and that's just going to circle back to what we were saying in total. It's like, it's hard to trust a government to do anything because when you give them power, control, opportunity, it's seldom going to work out in just the way that it's supposed to. They might cure that problem that's hitting you right now, but.
And I really think that, I think it's something that like the typical like American wouldn't think. We think, like all these politicians, they just want to do good. I think they just really like power and they like to be like, I've heard it. It's kind of like, it's like, not talking shit about like theater kids, but it's basically just theater kids who are now in like politics. You know what I mean? With these big impassioned speeches. They just kind of want people to adore them on the world stage. Yeah. Or they want power. Like Nancy Pelosi, her net worth is like $200 million or something like that. And she's like, I mean, a lot of these politicians, their net worth is so much. And they are in their 80s. They are still doing politics and still trying to get elected. And that's all they care about. And like the whole time I'm like thinking, like when I look at this, I'm like, why the hell wouldn't you just retire and just live out the rest of your life? You know, you can live in luxury and stuff like that. But I
Well, the
think
worst
these
people for politics are people that want to do politics.
but
The worst people for politics are people that want to do politics.
yeah, absolutely. I think it's like, oh, they genuinely want to do this, not because of like they don't care about the good. Because a lot of these people aren't doing shit in office. If they actually cared, they would maybe have a set of balls and like do anything, but they're just like kind of not doing shit. I think they just like the power. They like to be admired, like the attention, and they can't bear the thought of losing an election. Yeah, no, but that's very valid. Though anyone who like wants to be the president, you know, something like that, it's like, what's wrong with you? Why the hell would you ever want to? Why would you ever want to be the president? I could see maybe becoming like mayor of a town or something like that, or maybe a state senator. That makes sense because that's kind of more local. But it's like, why the fuck would you ever want to be president of the United States?
Yeah, I mean, it's like for someone to want to be in any of those positions, you want power in one level or another. And if the type of people that want power are just going to always want more power, it's never enough. You know, it's like if you crave it, you know, then was it absolute power corrupts absolutely? The classic type quote. You know that
Interesting.
one?
No, I don't think I've ever heard that.
So I was listening, and you'd love this, but Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. He did the series King of Kings, which is all about the kings of Persia, running through Cyrus the Great all the way to Alexander the Great. So like just that whole history of like 300 years. There are no King of Kings because they had, you know, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, empires ever. But what's so interesting is when you look at all these individuals, and this is anybody in history, not just those, but like it was really a good common theme looking through is that when you become the guy, you almost become corrupted by the power because
I can't.
It's never enough. And
like, sorry, you cut out for a little bit.
So like if when you become the guy, the power's never enough.
Yeah.
You always want more. Like there's never, you know, you look at the way Alexander the Great died, he just had to keep going. He just kept expanding, kept expanding, kept expanding when his empire was already the biggest the world has ever seen. And people told him just to turn back or sit down, let the army rest. He's like, no, we must keep going. Napoleon had a massive empire and could have sat forward, but he had to keep going into Russia. You look at someone like Hitler, you know, led the whole entire state of Germany. If he never attacked Russia, realistically, absolutely would have kept control of France. It probably would have been able to take Britain. And
but he wouldn't have been satisfied until he took over the whole entire world. But
that's exactly what I mean. It's like if he had that simple sense of I want to do what's best for, you know, the Third Reich, he would have just took some time and then maybe went after Russia. But instead, it was like he was so power hungry and also just thought so highly of himself that he was like, I can do both. I can take both. I think anyone that gets to a high level power position in some level is corrupt. It's just never enough.
And probably if you like keep going up to like high power positions, you keep winning, you probably start to think of yourself like you're like, holy shit, I'm a god.
Oh,
like
100%.
I can do like it's like there must be something different about me. Like I think I'm like a god. Like I think I was meant. You know, I think I'm chosen or either chosen by God.
Well, I mean, in ancient times, it was literally like Alexander the Great's a great example. Is they had said he was the daughter. His grandmother was some like Helda or like one of the and his grandfather was Hercules.
Oh, really?
Something like that.
So they did think he was a god.
But that's literally what it would be. Or like all of them, like Cyrus the Great's like he was known as like a god, and like for many religions still is like pretty much all the whatever they're called, like Judaism, Muslim, and Christianity, whatever that trifecta is under. In a lot of ways, it's looked up as like a very spiritual figure. But like, back then they probably legitimately thought they were gods. But today, in like almost a modern human sense, you might not think you're a god, but you definitely think you're the main character. Like there's something different.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like back then they're like, oh, like, because they believed in so deeply in spirituality. And obviously today it's a little different, but you know, in your head there's definitely a level of narcissism where it's like, I'm the guy. If you're the president of the United States, you're the guy.
Yeah.
There's been
Absolutely.
How many now? 46 in our entire country's history. There's been 46.
Yeah, you're the fucking guy. I mean, if over half of the country, I mean, electoral college, I mean, whatever. But like, if a good amount of the country says, "I want you to lead us," I mean, your ego is going to get pretty big.
And you're hanging dicks with other guys that are like that, like Putin or Xi in China.
Yeah, and then it just become. I think it just becomes, I want to be the best. You know, how can I remain in power?
Exactly. Well, that's what I think is happening with Putin.
If you think you're the main character, you don't give a shit about the citizens.
Oh no,
you do not give a shit about the citizens because you're in such a higher place.
You're also way more willing to take risks because it's like, I'm not going to lose this. Why would I lose this?
Yeah,
you're the
exactly.
guy. And that's
what fucking guy.
You see this happening with Putin right now. Because it's weird because it would almost be better for the U.S. if our presidents had more time in office. Because it's like 4 years is not that much.
No.
And two of those years are spent thinking about the election. For a year after you just got out of the election cycle, you're still kind of settling in and stuff. And then a year to year and a half out, you're dialing on the election. You know, and I guess the second term's a little different. I guess you could have 3 years. But, you know what I mean? Like, you really only have 2 years to maybe figure out what's going on, get stuff done, and then you're changing, and then you got to meet all these new people. You got to learn all the new secrets. You're like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But if you're like someone like Putin, who's been in power for literally 2 decades, almost 3 decades or something like that. Oh, I basically just saying it's like if you're president, you're coming in, you're like constantly trying to relearn everything. You got to learn the new stuff. If you're Putin, you've been in power for 3 decades. Like, where does your head go in those 3 decades? You know what I mean? I'll finish what I was saying though. Is like, yeah. So if you're any president of the U.S., you're constantly like getting like restructured and learning new things, whatever. If you're Putin, you've been in office for 30 years. You're in one of the biggest countries, most dangerous countries in the world. What does that do to the human mental state? You know what I mean? Like, that explains, he could be acting so erratic right now, the rumors he has cancer, whatever it is, because it's like, he's the main character, and in his head, it's like, the stories will just come to an end. Like, what?
Yeah, and you can kind of just, like, keep pushing the boundaries.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And then it just ties back to everything we were saying. It's like, if you're in South Africa, Mexico, and you have these mafias, these cartels, like, running everything, doing everything, it's really easy to think, like, the solution is, like, let the government take control, but it's almost like you're in a whirlwind effect where damn if you do, damn if you don't.
Yeah.
It's like, like, what's that quote, a proverb where it's like, you know, grass is always green on the other side, or like the enemy you know now, like, could be worse than, or could be better than the enemy that you find in the future, or something like that. Something similar, but it's basically like what they do to let the solution happen. And by all means, it might be the best thing for those countries to do, especially with all the violence that you see from these groups. But, you know, what comes next? And, like, does it end up being worth it? And a lot of them might say, yeah, and I think that's for the citizens to decide. But it's like we said here, is like sometimes when you kind of give up so much power, like, let them do what they want to do, it's hard to get it back. And I think that's probably the best way to look at it.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that kind of wraps it up for this episode. We really got to the kind of dive in and everything. Gonna have to do a lot of edits, but
Hey, maybe we leave it in, leave it raw.
yeah, just let them know.
Yeah,
But
yeah, just let them know. Keep it
all right,
real.
any closing remarks before we finish up?
No, I mean, yeah, taxis are crazy, I guess. Maybe we'll take a field trip out there one day. See what's good.
I'm definitely
and
down. But
if you're a high-level politician, you're deranged. I hope I don't get shot for saying that, you know? I mean, even, Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, all of you. I do like you, Bernie Sanders, though. You seem kind of authentic. You might just be a really, really good actor, but you kind of seem authentic because you're just walking around with your hair all crazy, just spouting crazy. You seem authentic, you know? Other than that, you know, lizard people. You cut out again.
my studio just kidding.
Okay, we're back.
just,
All right.
just finish what you were saying.
Yeah, I just said you're all lizard people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Thank you guys for tuning in once again. I thought it was a pretty good episode. I hope you guys found the topic interesting. And sorry for any of the problems that come up in editing, but I think it'll end up being pretty good. And it's a pretty crazy topic. I think Tim kind of said it best. Fucking taxis are crazy. Hopefully we get out there at one point. And the lizard people.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Thank you guys for tuning in, and excited to see you guys in the next one. Peace.
Peace.